Here we go. We both smile before we start. Do you ever? I always forget to do that. I always forget to do that. Okay. So, welcome to What You're Craving. I am psyched right now because Dr. Will Cole is on our show. I mean, if you don't know him, I'm not quite sure why. Get on it. But for the sake of bio, we'll say that he is a leading functional medicine expert who consults with people around the world, web and heading over there in the lovely town of Pittsburgh. I love Pittsburgh. That could be its own that could be its own podcast today. I'm telling you. I'm obsessed with Pittsburgh.
Oh man.
Yeah. Steelers,
That's
the whole
right.
thing.
It's the promised land. I love it.
Really is. It's an underrated virtue, Pittsburgh, actually. Anyway, he's been named one of the top 50 functional medicine and integrative doctors in the nation, and he specializes in clinically investigating underlying factors of chronic disease and customizing a functional medicine approach for thyroid issues, autoimmune conditions, hormonal imbalances, digestive disorders, and brain problems. He's the best-selling author of Ketotarian, The Inflammation Spectrum, and the New York Times bestseller, Intuitive Fasting, which I definitely want to talk about today, in which he shows how to use the powerful benefits of flexible intermittent fasting to gain metabolic flexibility and find food peace. He's also the host of the new podcast on Dear Media, The Art of Being Well, which is awesome. And he's co-hosted popular podcast Goopfellas and podcast Keto Talk. Welcome.
Thank you so much. That was very nice of you. I like you're my hype person.
I am. We're going to get to that in a minute. I didn't even know you, and I became your block and tackle when your beautiful book Intuitive Fasting came out. But let's talk about diet culture before we talk about
and Pittsburgh. I didn't. Why do you love? Can I say why do you love Pittsburgh? What's the deal?
I love down home, real talk, real people, real deal, and I feel like Pittsburgh is always so true to itself. I almost feel like if I was a person, I might be Pittsburgh.
If you were a city, Pittsburgh. I consider Pittsburgh. It is like a very cool, like East Coast, but still like has Midwest energy.
Like true.
Yeah, it is like it's the Brooklyn of Pennsylvania. For people that don't know, that's how I see Pittsburgh.
I mean, and anybody wants to go on a road trip with me, I'm down. 1,000%. Yeah, I love it there. I just love things that are real. I love authenticity.
Me too.
The other thing I love, which you do too, is paradoxes. I heard that about you. You're a paradox lover like me.
It is true. I'm drawn to them. And I don't even think about it sometimes because I'm so used to thinking about them that when I started writing Intuitive Fasting and this whole concept, because it's just born out of my clinical practice of me consulting patients, is realizing that to the world, intuition and fasting is very paradoxical. And I get it. I mean, it is partly paradoxical on purpose because it's a conversation about metabolic inflexibility, which fasting won't be intuitive at all. But that's why we want to lean into these practices to gain metabolic flexibility and have agency over our health. So fasting and food can be both very mindful and intuitive. But yeah, I wrote Ketotarian, which is plant-based and keto, and then intuition and fasting, and even functional medicine. It is the best of conventional medicine and the best of alternative medicine and natural medicine. So all of these are paradoxes, but the truth is often sometimes in the middle, and it's these toxic tribalism, I think, where you have polar opposites that it doesn't have to be either or all the time. It can be both and that's what I find beautiful about a lot of aspects of wellness.
Did you make up the term toxic tribalism? Because I'm really late to the party.
Yeah, I don't know if I did. I mean, that's how no, I don't think that I did. I think there's a lot of it going on. So there's probably a lot of us talking about it, but there's the best describer of.
I think it is the most perfect description of what's going on right now. I always say like the answer is very rarely the opposite. It's usually always the balance. And especially when it comes to like food and weight, the thing I'm obsessed with currently is diet culture, because it's like diet culture is not right. Anti-diet culture or diet culture has its flaws significantly, as does anti-diet culture. And I would love to hear, I love this find food peace thing that you're into. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah. So that's really the outcome of what I was trying talking about within intuitive fasting, and what I talk about with my patients, is you have these polar opposite food wars, this diet culture war that's happening with diet culture, which is really, really archaic when it comes to like shaming and obsession and restriction. And
Grinding.
it's just miserable. And then you have this rebound response that's anti-diet culture, or it's cloaked in the form of body positivity, which who isn't? I mean, I'm behind body positivity.
I
That's the
mean,
entire.
you're like a sociopath, terrible
Yeah,
human if you're anti-body positivity.
yeah. So I'm like for body
I think we should
positivity,
just
but
come out and be like, I'm anti-body positivity. So you can see like who would follow you.
oh yeah, right. I'm so for body positivity, but their like usage of the word sometimes is like it's all what they're against. Like they're against the anti-diet culture, and they're just like seething in their own contempt towards diet culture because they've been wronged by it, and I get it. But
Yes.
it's like very much their own toxic tribalism. And there's a third way, and that's what I talk about in intuitive fasting, and I talk about it with my patients, is this concept of food peace. It's like laying down the arms. Like, don't always be fighting and warring. Don't be warring with other people about these things, but don't be warring with yourself. Because oftentimes within the body positivity movement, they'll put out on social media one way is like, well, this is like all body positive, but really they're still struggling and feeling miserable and struggling with health problems too. So it's
Yeah.
like, I want an authentic, open, honest conversation that eating foods and doing things that's out of alignment with human physiology, you can put a nice Instagram filter on it, but ultimately it doesn't work. You can't normalize things that drive inflammation levels in the body. You just can't. So avoiding foods that don't make you feel good isn't restrictive, it's self-respect. And I want people to just have an honest conversation about it.
Can you
That
just say that again really slowly for those who are like deeply involved in what you're saying?
Um,
I
well,
know.
yeah, eating foods that drive inflammation levels, eating foods that
And
hurt the
what
human.
are those foods while we're here?
Yeah, I mean, it's foods like added sugar, industrial seed oils like canola oil, soybean oil, vegetable oil,
Mhm.
gluten-containing grains, specifically refined grains, but a lot of grains can be very disruptive to the human microbiome and our blood sugar and inflammation levels, and conventional dairy. That's some of the things. Like eating configurations of that,
Mhm.
and you can eat whatever you want, and that's what I talk about in the book too. You can have whatever you want, but it's like I want people to really come from a place of self-respect and say, no, I love feeling great more than I thought I missed something that doesn't make me feel good.
Yeah.
And it's a bad trade-off when you feel so freaking fantastic to eat something that disrupts that and dims your light. So that's what I want to say is like a lot. I feel like the body positivity movement and the health at every size movement and the anti-diet culture movement and the intuitive eating community too, they have good intentions, but they're lost in the form of extreme toxic tribalism because they're lacking all nuance and context.
Well, and I think they might be lacking like a medical frame on it is a lot of the
Yeah,
time, and
probably.
a physical frame on it. Like what you're saying about sugar and gluten. It's like I wonder. I think so much about intuitive eating because it nearly killed me personally. Because I really have more of an addictive way
Hmm.
towards sugar and flour. And I don't know that I think I probably would have died on that program the way that they were telling me to eat until I was done. I think I
Hmm.
would have been done to the
Yeah.
tune of type 2 diabetes and everything in between. So I think it's really hard to find wisdom. Um, do you think that people need tools and support to get to intuitive eating more than what the program suggests?
Yeah, I think that there are people that are served by when I'm talking about there's the capital I, capital E intuitive eating, that book that was written in the 90s. There's people that have disordered eating that it really works for them. And like that's I don't want to if it
Me
works for
too.
you, keep doing it. Keep
Me
doing it.
too. Yeah.
But it's like there's a lot of people that aren't served by that because the nuance is lost. And you look at the statistics, it's 80% of the United States has metabolic issues and there's somewhere on that insulin resistant inflammation spectrum where you're going to tell the majority of the human race right now in the United States that say eat intuitively and just like you said, eat until you're satiated. They're going to perpetuate. That's not intuition. That's a metabolic disorder. That's
Mm.
going to fuel foods that fuel the problem. you can't normalize that. That's going to move you away from feeling great about yourself,
Yeah.
because having chronic inflammation isn't feel good. It doesn't feel good. You can make it look nice on social media with your nice glossy picture, but it's really not people
It
don't feel
also
good.
looks awesome on social media. I always think about that because I come from the other end of it. I come from like, hey, I come from your end. Like I come from this, hey, like, let's get mindful, let's get thoughtful, let's get curious.
Yeah.
And I feel like coming from that frame of like, eat as much peanut butter until you're done. It's just such an easy, if you had to choose between those two things and you were in the middle of that pain, I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to eat peanut butter. Like count me in.
Totally. I get it. It's very appealing. It's very sexy sounding. But the reality is, most people, it's not going to work for them. And we can see, I see that on an hourly basis with patients, is that same thing. They come from that anti-diet culture where they're like, I came to that place because of diet culture, but then I was in this other tribe where they were telling me to keep eating things that was actually fueling health problems in my life, where it's like, that's not the answer either. We just need to have a peace when it comes to this. Like, start to heal your relationship with your body, but heal your relationship with food, and actually heal your body too.
Well, it's such a trauma response to diet. I mean, that's what, like, as a therapist, I always think that, like, it just feels to me like such a trauma response, like going all the way to the other extreme. And I think in the anti-diet culture, it's like, and you should never even release weight, and you should never even. Do you think that that's true? You should never ever even release weight.
Right. I know it's an interesting thing. I mean, they actually almost shame people when they lose weight. It's a really interesting thing. They're just doing the opposite, but they're still using shame as some sort of they're weaponizing it in a way. We're still going to all be different sizes. That's the beautiful thing, is that we're saying the same thing. We are going to all be healthy at different sizes, but we're actually going to be healthy.
Right. And maybe happy and in true intuition. With our bodies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's really the message with the book. I didn't think it was going to be so controversial, but
that book was so controversial.
I didn't plan it. I heard someone say on a podcast somewhere that I was tagged in, and I saw it was in my feed. They said, "Oh, he just has like great PR person, and that's why." If they actually read the book, and they were like, "The book's actually very measured, but it's just the PR machine of like getting." I'm like, well, I thought of the title. There's no PR team. It's just me and on my back deck in Pennsylvania writing this book over 2020. Because it's just what I see clinically is when you have metabolic flexibility, that is on a physiological health level, fertile foundation for authentic mindful eating and intuitive fasting, not because it's arduous or punitive. You can just go longer without eating because you aren't so consumed by your hangriness. You're not consumed with your insatiable cravings. Well, that's what I'm talking about.
I think that there is a piece of it. So, fun fact, Will and I are just meeting for the first time, but I'm very quiet on social media. I'm working on it, but I went full throttle in the spirit of the Pittsburgh Steelers, block and tackle about your book and these communities that I sit in, because it actually, to me, was one of the great things that is wrong with our wellness communities. And what really freaked me out is this wasn't a wellness community I was in. This was like an addictions and eating disorders professionals group of people who sat and saw Gwyneth Paltrow holding your book and just started to like rail on the book. And how could, first of all, they're like, how could she write that book? I was like, guys, come on, just zoom in on the picture. It's like just a little bit. I mean, it's just amazing though. I mean, just to speak, but the trauma response of all of it, right? Like, and that's the thing, like I know about trauma, like trauma, we're in our tribal mind, nobody's like wisdom was really working when they saw that picture. The two things that I said that I really want to hear I said, I don't think that, and this may be not true, but I don't think that I don't think that Dr. Will Cole was writing this book for people with eating disorders, because their whole response is like, people with eating disorders shouldn't read this book. And I'm like, yeah, people with eating disorders shouldn't read a book called Intuitive Fasting, like ever. So I want to hear about that. But the other thing I said, which I want to hear about, was that I always remember when Gwyneth Paltrow was on Armchair Expert with Dak Shepard, and Dak Shepard pulled this thing from the 12 steps, which I'm in and I love. And he said, people's reaction to Gwyneth Paltrow really makes them need to think about what's going on with them that's making them have that reaction about her. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
what's going on? So I love that. But
Yeah.
were you writing intuitive fasting for people with eating disorders?
No, I was not. But thank you for letting me clarify that. And I
I'm
say that
sorry
within
you
the,
have to clarify that.
yeah, I mean, I say it within the first couple pages of the book too, very clearly. Actually, I say it throughout the book, but very, very pointedly at the beginning of the book is that, if you have a past or current eating disorder, talk with your eating disorder specialist, talk with your doctor. This probably isn't for you. With that said, there are people that I know within the eating disorder community that when they got metabolic flexibility, meaning that they had lowered inflammation, their blood sugar was more stable, and they got the go ahead, they're like way in their recovery. There's like a past issue that they've used these tools as a way to enhance their health. They feel even better because they
Oh yeah,
feel
I'm one of them, by the way. I mean,
right.
that's the other thing I wrote in there. Like, but it was like 8 years in. I was like,
Right.
oh, let me
It's not like
try
the
this.
first thing
Right.
you're doing. Right. So if you get the go ahead from your eating disorder specialist and your doctor, it can be an amazing tool. And I got so countless amount of people in the eating disorder community that told me they would direct message me and say, I can't even come out and say I use intermittent fasting because I will be vilified
Oh
by
yeah.
this toxic tribalism within this community that's supposed to be so accepting. I mean, it's really not accepting at all. Just like all of these toxic tribalism, they're not accepting. They're only accepting if you agree with them across the board, which isn't acceptance. It's not
My
at all.
friend, my friend Jess Cording, who you were on her
Oh
podcast,
yeah, I
was
love her. Yeah,
she's the best. So
yeah.
she was coming on my podcast and she wrote me this text and she said, hey, with all the stuff going on in the eating disorder community from your beautiful book, she was like, I don't think I can say that I'm anti-intuitive eating on your show. I was like, well, who's anti-intuitive eating, Jess? Like, I think we have to talk about this. I do think this is like the thing that people in this field who come from backgrounds with a lot of integrity need to say. And I'm not anti anything. Like
Right.
there's too much biodiversity for anybody
Yeah.
to be anti anything.
No, absolutely. Yeah. It's like if something's working for you, keep doing it. Like that's the heart of functional medicine. It's bio-individuality. We're all different. And that's what I say throughout the book. Like just check in with your body. Like how do you feel with these things and adjust it accordingly. So you're absolutely right. I'm not anti anything. I'm anti like attacking
Yeah,
people.
I'm anti-bullying.
Yeah, I'm anti-bullying. I'm anti-hate.
Me too. I'm
Yeah,
anti body image. Wait, what am I? I'm antibody. Yeah. I mean, because I'm
yeah.
pro body image, you
Yeah,
know?
it's like anti-shaming people. Like
Yeah,
that,
me
like
too.
that stuff that like across like treat humans with respect. Like that's what I'm for. But all the rest of this stuff, it's like, yeah, if it works for you, let's do it. Like that's what functional medicine is. You're curious and you're open-minded and you're flexible and you're okay with it, like cognitive flexibility and being cognitive, adjusting your opinion as you learn more. And
Oh, I love that. Wait, so my 325-pound self always sits in on the podcasts. She's not that nice. This is like what just came up for me. She's just angry and hopeless, you know.
yeah,
So she was just like she was just like, okay, we are like, so just like finding intuition is not as easy as sometimes we make it sound. So when you're knee deep, like, let me tell you, let's go back 15, 20 years. Like when you're like knee deep, like in ring dings and haven't moved your body and are pretty convinced you can't get well and you can't stop binging and all that, where do you start in all of this, in your
yeah.
opinion?
Yeah, it's a good place to start. And I get it. Like for me throwing these words out there, it's easier said than done. It's you have to show up for yourself and be consistent with the work and be consistent with the effort of building this metabolic flexibility.
But I
So
think that this is where the messaging I think goes bonkers, right? Because
yeah,
usually what I see in my world is people using intermittent fasting as a fad diet.
hmm
And like, I don't think that's what you mean it to be either.
no, not at all. And I don't even know intermittent fasting is just one tool within the toolbox, right?
Yeah.
So I think I would actually start with, and I say this in the book too, is the week one of that protocol. And it's one of those things of like the group of people that were saying like they were judging the book. It literally were judging a book by its cover. They didn't read it.
No, like literally.
Literally. It
It's
was
not
like
just a fancy phrase we're using here.
you're a cliche. You are a walking cliche. So because when they read the book, if anyone that reads the book, what they were saying on social media was, yeah, the only fast you should do is fasting through the night. Well, that's actually what I said in the book. I actually say, when you're metabolically inflexible, that should be your first fast, is just start with a simple 12-12 time compressed feeding. You're just avoiding late night snacking. You're allowing a couple of hours to go after you're done with eating dinner before you go to bed. Very measured advice to allow you have an eating window all throughout the day, and you're focusing on really nourishing, delicious foods until satiety. This is not about caloric restriction, and people like to conflate that as well. We're not restricting calories. We're eating until satiety of the world's most healing, nutrient dense foods.
Right.
That's in alignment with their physiology, that lowers blood sugar or balances blood sugar, lowers inflammation levels, supports homeostasis in the body, and makes you feel happy because you're getting your body the raw materials it needs. So I would say the first thing is just week 1 in that protocol in the book is just 12-12. So you can do 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Like, that's your eating window. Focus on really like, what are ways you can nourish your body throughout that day?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I would say. And then, like I say in the book, if you need to repeat week 1 for 2 or 3 weeks until you lean into something more, do that. This is self-paced, intuitively, to check in with your body to see where you're at. And the 4-week protocol can end up being 7-8 weeks because of meeting your body where it's at and not rushing it. So be gentle and be in tune with your body. And then week 2, we dig into about a 14 or 18 hour fast, which even then isn't super restrictive. It's not. You have a 6 to 8 hour eating window, even a 10-hour eating window. You have basically all day. We're just doing flexible time compressed feeding, which are just eating in a specific window. So it's giving your body a bigger fasting window to start repair things and to help to lower inflammation levels and support your gut microbiome balance.
Yeah. What about like the idea that one size doesn't fit all, like for health conditions? Like how do we use intuition to help find, because I mean, what you're saying is that intuitive fasting is for some people, it isn't for all people. I guess I'm just, with all the information out there and all the health coaches and this and that, I was like, how do we find the right people and the right program for us?
Well, I think for most people, the answer would be experimentation. So if you're getting solid information, and especially for somebody like myself that's saying we're all different anyways,
Right.
our path's going to end up different. And I make so much modifications throughout that book so people can adjust it accordingly, flexibly. It's not going to be this very narrow, restrictive way of doing it. There's so many modifications through it. And the whole point of the protocol is to intuitively involve it to suit yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So as you, just like that, the analogy that I use in the book is like this proverbial yoga class for your metabolism. At the beginning, if you've never done yoga before, your hamstrings are tight, you're like weaker, they're going to go to yoga and think yoga is the most unnatural, like inhumane thing in the world, right?
Right.
But that's not, if they could say yoga is not for them, but it's not yoga's fault, it's their inflexibility. So what I want people to do that are metabolically inflexible, like you said, they're hangry, they have blood sugar problems, they're not feeling so good, they're kind of irritable because they don't feel good. Show up to that beginner yoga's class in the form of that 12-12 and then lean in from there. And as you get the hang of it, you'll become more rooted in your body and you'll be able to adjust these things accordingly. So it takes time, but that's the art and the science of all of this.
Well, and I think that this is like the downfall of all diet culture, right? I mean, there's no curiosity. There's no idea that, I mean, there's actually, when you think about diet culture in this way, there's actually no concept that there's going to be a relationship with food, which I don't know about your relationships, but mine, like they grow, they change, they evolve. Sometimes I leave them. Sometimes there's new ones that come in. And in my experience, in my eating recovery, what I eat, how I eat, my relationship with food, how I think about food is so different over a decade in recovery. I mean, like night and day in many ways. It was so like mindful and thoughtful and like over so because I had to really get healthy and had to be like the most focused. Now it's just like this really lovely, easygoing part of my life. And I think people forget that. And then I don't know, in psychology, we call it like the abstinence violation effect. It's like, and then, you know, I'm on your 12-12 because I've decided that your program really speaks to me and works for me. And then I go 14 and I'm deep in Cheetos. It's like slicing all the four tires on your car when you get a flat tire and leaving the car in the middle of the road. I think that's a big piece of it. Is that what you see too?
Yeah, I think, and that's why you have to be, if you lean into something and you say, this is too much for me right now, go back to it. And like, obviously we're talking about people that don't have a history of disordered eating, like, but
Can we
the
say that
average
again? We're talking about people that don't
yeah,
have a history of disordered eating. Because I
exactly.
think that within that also sometimes I think the history of disordered eating, maybe more towards the binge eating part of it. Part of that makeup is hippity hoppity cut run. Okay, I'll do this 12-12, and then I'm gonna go and then and it's like, and then you are so stuck in the vortex of dieting, you've lost your life.
Right. And then, but for the person that doesn't have a history of disordered eating, that's just struggling with hangriness, that's struggling with cravings, even they could rush into something too much where they could do a fast that's too progressive, too advanced for where they're at, and they could end up with the Cheetos too. That's not what I'm advocating people to do. This is not disordered eating disguised as a wellness practice. It's not that. And nor is it something that has to be super extreme at all. We're talking about very flexible ways of approaches of eating, very, very measured. We're not talking about multiple day fast. We're not talking about caloric restriction. And that's why I wanted to explore the concept of this very subset of intermittent fasting called time compressed feeding, because you're still eating delicious foods. You're still eating healthy amount of calories. You're just doing it in very specific windows to balance your blood sugar and to really get some physiological stability in your body. So that's, but food comes first. You cannot fast your way out of a poor diet. So people need to be mindful of that. I'm
Oh my God.
advocating.
You are just one little quotable after the next,
Yeah,
Dr. Wilcall. But that's really
it's
true.
Yeah, it's true. And look, the research in the medical literature and the scientific literature, some studies had to be done to see, okay, where are the benefits of intermittent fasting? Because is it from the cutting calories slightly? Is it from changing the foods? Is it from the eating window? Well, you had to standardize that for studies to see where the benefits came from. Well, we know that the eating windows impact your health, even if you don't change much of what you eat. But I would say from a real life standpoint, we're not in a randomized controlled trial. We're in a real life situation. I would not advocate somebody to just don't change, like eat out unhealthy foods and then try intermittent fasting. That's definitely not what I would advocate, because you're basically just asking for a problem, because your blood sugar is all over the place. You're going to be hangry and really miserable during that fast. And that's the antithesis of what I'm advocating for in intuitive fasting.
Well, and I always think this about body. I mean, people are like, because I'm a therapist, help me with my body image. I'm like, well, if you're harming your body, it's going to be really hard to love your body. And so I don't think that many people are under the guise that when they're like downing the Cheetos, it's in this like act of self-love, perhaps, but most people. And so, yeah, I think, like, can we talk a little bit about prevention? Can we talk a little bit about like why it's important to put healthy food in like, if you had to say like the top 3 things that would help me to prevent metabolic conditions, what would you say that they could be? And also, can we talk about metabolic conditions like second grade teaching me about them?
Sure. Yeah. So it's estimated that I think I mentioned this, but 80% of the world, specifically the United States, but Western culture, is metabolically inflexible. They're struggling with some blood sugar problem, but it exists on a spectrum, right? Not everybody's type 2 diabetic, even though that number is growing by leaps and bounds. But that's one end. Yeah, it's a lot of people, but they're somewhere on that spectrum where they have type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, metabolic syndrome, PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is driven by insulin resistance, and weight loss resistance and fatigue issues. And that's just the insulin resistance sort of spectrum on that.
And what's the problem with that? Like, why do I not want to have metabolic compromised body? Like, why?
Well, I mean, it shortens our lifespan by 4 to 10 years. So there's
that.
That's a good one. But it's the leading cause of heart disease. It doubles your risk for heart attack and stroke. It doubles your risk for many types of cancer. And that's just really serious diseases that are killing the majority of the human race. It's driven by insulin resistance. But beyond that, it's just your quality of life. It's like, it increases fatigue, and you feel out of control because physiology is out of control. Your blood sugar is on a roller coaster. You're going to feel out of control.
Yeah. Well, the hangry of it all, right? Like
Yeah,
it's not just
hangry,
like acute.
cravings.
Yeah. Oh,
No,
cravings.
it's not fun. I mean, anybody's done that, they will tell you it's no fun. You feel out of control because physiologically your body's all over the place. And chronic inflammation, it just makes you feel not good, digestive problems, low libido, you're not sleeping well, you're in pain many times. I mean, this is varying degrees of the human race right now. It's not it's common, but not normal.
Yeah.
And just because something's common doesn't mean it's normal or we should settle for it, because these are largely reversible, preventable, healable things. So if we can do that, why don't we do that? Because that's actually truly self-respect. Like feeling great in your body is a form of self-respect.
Absolutely. It's hard to get out of it. Like, do you have any idea about how long it takes to come out of like self-harming yourself with food from a medical perspective? I always feel like it's about 3 days, but I could be wrong. I'm just a little therapist over here in the corner.
Well, I mean, look, it's the body is amazing. I mean, you look at the studies of the gut microbiome, you'll start seeing changes pretty within a couple of days. You'll see people start changing the foods that they eat, start bringing acts of self-respect in their life. The microbiome will start to change pretty quickly, which is 75-80% of the immune system. Inflammation is a product of the immune system. A lot of this has to do with the gut.
But
So the
that's so
gut's going to,
hopeful. You know what I
it's
mean?
so amazing. The
It's
body's
so
so
hopeful. You're
amazingly
like, in a couple
resilient.
days, you can feel better. Like, I just know for me, like, again, the 325 part of me is like, there's no hope. I can't get out of this. You're like, well, actually 2 days you can start feeling, I mean, that's something.
Yeah, right. And then you get your head above water and you can breathe a little bit. And that's so encouraging because you want to keep doing the things. It's just the momentum, the positive momentum starts to build. But the larger continuum is it takes months to get to where you need to really be at. But every month you're feeling better than the month prior. And that's what I want people to really be focusing on. So that is why people should be mindful of the metabolic issues. I forget the second part of the question.
Me too, but that means we're at a really good lunch date. You know what I mean? But so my other question is sort of about like, quick, like what are if you had to say to change, so we say you think this 12 and 12 thing is a great idea. If there was something outside of a fasting spectrum, and even for people who are more disordered eating, so that, you know, like what would you say, is there any, like, when you think of prevention, what do you wish if you had a magic wand and you said, okay, everybody has to do 3 things?
Oh yeah,
now,
that was the
what
other
would you
part
have
of the
them do?
question. Yeah,
I'm just here to serve, you know?
Yeah. So, well, the eating window is one of them. And I would say actually I talked about at the top of the show, is that decreasing these inflammatory core 4 foods. They're just never going to work for humans. Some people can handle some of them. So I'm not saying everybody has to eliminate all of these. I'm just saying
it's sad that we have to do that caveat before you say everything on the show. You're like, basically, this is like the 3rd time you've said it. He's like, I'm not saying go to the extreme with this. I'm saying listen with your internal wisdom to what I'm saying, and then integrate it appropriately in your life, thinking about your own relationship with food. It's sad that we have to do that, though.
It is. And it is. But the nuance, I'm trying to hold space for the middle ground, right? It's like, well, I can think of exceptions to like people that are like, I have that food every once in a while, I'm fine. Well, yes, I'm not saying everyone has to avoid it entirely, but having less of it in your life is going to be beneficial. And many people should go a time where they're not having any of this, and then try to bring a little bit.
Or see what it's like. That's how I feel about sugar. I'm like, go 66 days without it. If you think you're in an unhealthy relationship with sugar, take 66 days, because that's when automacy happens, not 3. And then you want to go back to it like via Cornelius.
Totally. Exactly. So sugar, industrial seed oils, grains, mainly gluten-containing grains, and dairy. I think those, if you decrease the amount of those, plus you look at this very flexible eating windows, fill it with really nourishing, nutrient-dense things like healthy fats, like wild-caught fish and avocados and olives and nuts and seeds and coconut cream and these type of healthy fats and clean protein, lots of vegetables, fruits, gluten-free grains can work for many people too, like rice and quinoa and legumes. Like focusing on that which works for the human physiology and decreasing the things that will detract from you feeling great is really what I want people to be focused on. It's very, very measured advice, but people can start to feel better. The body's amazingly resilient. But then they have to look at stress and
Oh
which
yeah.
stress is a part of it, because you
Oh,
could,
could we pin stress for a second? Because I have a really, so
yeah.
what if I don't have any money?
So
Like we're
I,
talking about some real 1% suggestions here. Like, what if I just can only shop at Walmart and the
yeah,
bodega? Then what do I
well,
do?
well, like you said, I am from Pittsburgh, right?
You
This
sure
is a
are.
blue collar city, and most of my patients actually are middle class people. Like my top patient base are nurses, school teachers. Like that's most of my patients that are just obviously they're not um, working class
Impoverished,
per
right?
se, but they're middle class people that many of them have to budget for their food and their wellness. So I'm used to making this work for the average person, but we live in such an awesome time where things are different now compared to where they were 20 years ago. Like I remember growing up in the 80s and 90s where it's like my parents went to the health food store co-op and it was like that was where you got healthy food. And you bought the expensive stuff and that was like the only things that were available at that time. Now it's very different. I mean, you go to Aldi, I go through Aldi, there's tons of organic options and fresh produce at Aldi. You go through Trader Joe's, there's great things at Trader Joe's.
Oh yeah, we get
Walmart.
Misfits at my house. We get the
Yeah.
the
The
Misfits
produce,
box.
Misfits. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It
Yeah.
makes
Right.
me feel good on I feel like a misfit a lot. So it's like
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
healing
But
to
it
me to eat
decreases
the
food
misfit.
waste too.
No, it
Yeah.
does. Exactly.
You go
But
through Walmart and Costco and Sam's Club, like Target, like you can get all the things that I just said. You can get cheaper options at all of those places because
just has
that's
to be
where
a
I
little
shop too.
thoughtful.
You
Oh,
have to be
good.
thoughtful. Right.
Yeah, I think
Exactly.
that's right. And if we don't have time to be thoughtful, would you say, I remember Melissa Urban saying this about Whole30. It was one of my favorite posts she ever had. She said when she first started it, she'd be like, no, has to be this way. And then 10 years later, she's like, yeah, I mean, if you can only get frozen vegetables, then like do it in that moment. I think again, this is lost in the middle path. I'm listening. Oh, he says only this pressed oil I can get. Forget it. I'm just going to go eat Cheetos. Like,
yeah,
that's not what we're saying.
Not what they're saying. Yeah. So do the best you can, what's within your budget, because the body's amazingly resilient. So even if you just did what you could in that category and just said, maybe I'm not going to buy all the things organic, but I'm going to rinse off the things that aren't organic and just, or the Environmental Working Group, EWG, has the Clean 15 list and the Dirty Dozen. So maybe the Clean 15, you are getting non-organic.
What does that mean, the Clean 15 list and the Dirty Dozen?
So it's the clean, it changes every year based off of the research, but EWG.org, that update the list. And Clean 15 are the 15 different types of produce, vegetables, and fruits that are the lowest pesticides. So you can buy non-organic, just regular conventional stuff to save money and just rinse it off well. But the Dirty Dozen, you're going to want to try to get organic when you can, if it's available.
Because those are the really bad. Like what's on the Dirty Dozen? Do you know off the top of your head? Like just two or three? Probably grapes, right?
I think grapes are. I think apples probably are on the Dirty Dozen. Honestly, changes every year. So we have it printed out for patients, or like we email it out to patients every year. But it does change it, and a lot of times the things that are can be even grown in the ground can sometimes be higher in pesticides too because of the soil. So you have to do the best you can. You do the best you can. Just get resources like that will
That's such a
make it
take-home
budget friendly.
skill. That's such a take-home skill. Okay, I'm taking the pin out because I really want to hear about this. Is my stress level and my not sleeping really impacting me? Is it such a big deal?
Well, the short answer is yes. The big answer is the analogy that I use. It's the bucket theory, right? Some people have massive buckets. Some people have smaller buckets. I'm using my mug here as an example. Some people have massive mugs, right? They're like stressed out. They're not sleeping well. They eat like foods that drive inflammation levels up in average person, and they're like decently fine. You probably are going to find things on labs. I see it all the time, is that they're like coming because they're good, but they just want to see where their health is, and their labs are still not great, but they feel okay. Their bucket's probably pretty dang big, and it takes a lot to overflow, hitting that tipping point. Many people, they have smaller mugs and they're going to overflow a lot easier. You can't change your mug size. You can't change your genetic tolerance to stressors, and food can be stressors, like foods that disrupt the microbiome and impact your blood sugar. That's stress. But mental, emotional stress will raise inflammation levels too and add to that bucket overflow, add to that mug overflow. But you can change what you put in it pretty dramatically. So the question is with stress, it's like, well, how overflowing is your bucket? If it's close to overflowing already, that can definitely be a tipping point. And that's where you look at stress in the medical literature of how stress can trigger autoimmune issues, and trauma can trigger autoimmune issues and different metabolic issues, because it's adding to the overflow of that mug overflow. So the answer is yes. It's going to impact all of us. It's going to add to that capacity, the resilience capacity. It's going to decrease that resilience capacity, but it's just one ingredient of many. But then the problem with this is that, like you said, like the average person that's listening to this is like, okay, it's easier for me to say, I'm not going to have these really bad foods. It's a little harder for it to say, I'm not going to stress out. And then they stress about not stressing because they think I have to do all the things. And how could I do that? That's a little bit more, nebulous of a concept. But the reality is we just have to really bring acts of stillness into our life to weather that stressful time of our life as much as we can. And that's where getting a great therapist or bringing mindfulness meditation into your life, or getting out in nature, or journaling, or these things to support the parasympathetic can be very helpful to not change your situation, but move through these situations with a little bit more grace.
Talk me through parasympathetic, just because you're a doctor and you're hearing it so far.
So it's most people are too much in the sympathetic response. That's the fight or flight, stressed out, inflamed. That's the state of most people, more or less. And their body's parasympathetic responses are not as strong or not as actualized throughout the day. That's the resting, digesting, the rest and repair mechanisms that people, it's just dampened. It's not as strong. It's not as resilient in people's bodies. So when you hear about the benefits of meditation, or the benefits of rest, or the benefits of self-care, a lot of it's centered around the parasympathetic, like supporting those mechanisms in the body to help lower stress hormones and lower inflammation levels and support digestive health, which is where most of your immune system is, to help lower inflammation levels that way. So that's really why you see this explosion of research around meditation and different mindfulness practices and self-care practices, because it really has to do with empowering and upregulating and supporting the parasympathetic system in the body.
I also think about it, honestly, with intuitive eating. Like I think about, I'm a big I have mine's like a shot glass. Like I don't even have a mug. Like my capacity to weather storms is like a shot glass. So I'm I don't think of this as a bad word. I'm incredibly high maintenance in how I have to manage myself.
Yeah.
So obviously I had to go into transcendental meditation, because that's the one that takes the longest. But if I could explain to you that how I'm able to navigate, I mean, I come from a raunchy long-term eating disorder and many other addictions. And if I could explain to you the kind of navigation system that I was able to open as a function of this, I can stop when I'm full, I'm like, oh, I'm full. That to me is and I think it's a function of changing the foods that I've eaten completely and being really mindful, because you can't tap into intuition. You can't tap into wisdom when your brain's on fire.
No, it's going to be really hard. It's going to be very difficult. Like, obviously people can grit their teeth and push through it, but when you're in a state of a proverbial noise in the form of that chronic inflammation and blood sugar volatility, it's going to be hard to really do it, because your still small voice of your intuition is going to be drowned out from the screams of that imbalance. It's
like in the ICU. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, no, let's calm the noise so we can start to hear and have better clarity and agency over our health and our bodies, not in an obsessive way, not in a restrictive, controlling way, but in a very much a peaceful, resolute way of just a knowingness of food, and what things make you feel good and what foods don't make you feel good. And that's the food piece that I talk about in the book.
Well, I heard you on the Skinny Confidential podcast, which is a great listen for 15,000 reasons. One of them, it really helped me to be more brave, because I just want to say this on a side note, just to get out of I don't know if I would have been able, I mean, you just were like resolute when all of that came out with intuitive fasting, and you just stood your ground and you just went on the interviews and you're like getting death threats. Is that
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, it
Oh my
was
God.
over a fasting book, but it's kind of crazy. It says
Over
more
a
about them than me.
medically confirmed fasting book. I might have just been like, you know what? I'm gonna take this book and go home. And you were just like loud and proud, and it was great. I mean, and
Thank
the
you.
host.
Part of it was I didn't really fully know, I think, everything that was being said, because I just like kind of turned off everything because I was so focused. I was seeing my patients. I really had a couple of days with book stuff and then went back to seeing patients.
Yeah.
So and now I just make a practice. I really don't look at much things online about it, but
Yeah, but I love, you know what, that there's a lesson in there because I have a whole day clinical, and it really, talk about primary purpose. You sit, and I think for everybody, like, like having something that it really helps me not like harm myself, having something bigger than me. Like you're like, okay, death threat, but also I have a bunch of patients to go to,
yeah.
and you're passionate about that work.
Yeah, it is.
Obviously.
And like that was like that was the realigning of the perspective that I needed to do. Is like when it like threw me off for a day or two of like, why are they misunderstanding me so much? And I was like, oh wait, I can't change someone's mind who's committed to misunderstanding me, especially if they're not going to read the book. It's like, this is an exercise in futility. I'm just going to literally have to move on. And oh wait, I get to see 11 hours a day someone's inflammation come down, and they regain their health, and then feel the stuff that I'm writing about in the book. Oh wait, that's actually real life, and that's actually someone's weird opinion.
I think we're really, I mean, yeah, I think someone on Twitter called me like a predator, for saying that sugar was addictive. But I think then I was like, oh, but then there's just thousands and thousands of people who are like, oh my God, this has really helped me find freedom, and I can actually like breathe again, because that was actually the problem in all of it.
Totally. Yeah.
But here's the thing I loved. The other thing I loved about it is, as you said something to the effect of like, because Lauren was asking you like the most intense questions, which I love about her. And she, but you said this thing like, yeah, I mean, I do a fast, except for when I don't, and can you just say more? Like, I loved it. You're like, yeah, I mean, I eat all the stuff except for what, and can you just say more about like your own flexibility? Because I think it just speaks to who you are in a way.
Thank you. Yeah. So that's the point of the book. It's a flexible approach. So you to intuitively check in with your body, where I may plan, I'll wake up in the morning. I'm seeing patients 11 hours a day. Like basically I get to the clinic at 7:30 and I'm there till 7 p.m. most nights. So at this point, I may plan for an 18-hour fast one day because I feel great doing it. I have increased energy. I feel sharp. I'm metabolically flexible. But maybe one day I won't want to do it. So I wake up and be like, nope, my body's telling me I need to eat, and I'm completely fine with it. I don't shame myself. I'm not like I'm a failure. There's no failure whatsoever. I'm eating nutrient dense foods then that make me feel great, and I'm serving myself in a different way. These are all
it's not
ways
throwing
of
the
serving
baby out with the
yourself.
bathwater. I just always think I try to do like a 14. It's like, but if like I have an early breakfast meeting, I'm not gonna be like, you know what? Sorry, I'm not gonna participate in this event with you because the timer's still on. Like that's not.
No, I never think
That's
like
eating
that.
disordered, by the way. Like that's eating disordered.
Totally. Or you can choose. It's not about I can't, it's just I may choose not to. And that's the other side of that. You're right. Most of the time I won't, but it's like at the same time, I don't want people to feel like they're at the whim of other people's
I love
pressure and
that. Yeah,
judgment, So it's like, okay, no, I'm all right. If people are like, they don't get what I'm doing, or they are gonna like say that I'm weird, I'm all right with that.
Oh, me too. I was just at a party with a bunch of my friends and this kind of new person, and and there was lobster rolls, and she said, I don't eat gluten. Is everyone going to think I'm weird that I'm not eating the bun? And I said, oh my God, I haven't eaten bread in 12 years. They're just used to there being a mountain of carbs on the plate next to me, just sitting near me. Like I could give 0 F's about this, you know?
Totally. And it's like no shame on the people that do it, but I'm like, I don't
No,
know.
but
I'm
that's the
cool with it.
flexibility of all of it. Sometimes it's to fit in socially because you want to, and sometimes you say no. But this is the whole point.
Right. There's just a piece about all of this that people need to realize. That's what I'm talking about. They're not going to get it overnight, but I promise you, I've seen it for 12 years. The more you cycle through these principles of really just using food and fasting as a mindfulness practice, or just food as a mindfulness practice, if you don't want to do the fasting, like just the more you gain such a strength and confidence in this, and you feel better physically, but also you feel more clear and healthier mentally, emotionally, spiritually, there's just a knowingness where you're your own N of one experiment. You don't need to, the pontification on social media is like noise. It's like,
you don't need to like worry how much peanut butter you're allowed to eat watching this skinny nutritionist like downing peanut butter. It's like not your pig, not your farm, not your circus, not your monkey, you know?
Exactly.
My favorite one.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Oh, well, I'm so glad we got to chat. I just want to chat all day, but thank you so much for coming on. I learned so much, and I love finding a fellow middle pather, I have to tell you.
We're a dying breed.
Or maybe
hopefully there's more of us.
We're going to reinvent. Maybe we should start a middle pather club.
I would love that. Let's like awaken this country to doing this on all levels. I think it's brilliant.
I nominate headquarters in Pittsburgh. Do I have a second? Anybody second?
Second here.
Okay, all in favor.
This is like middle ground USA.
It's I mean, we're
pretty moderate across the board.
I just want to go to a Steelers game. I mean, I could sit in a Steelers game and just be the happiest little clam in the world.
I love that.
Hey, where can we find you if we want more?
Thank you so much. This has been great. Everything's at drwillcole.com. That's drwillcole.com.
Yeah. Great. Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Okay.